Hello and welcome. My name is Stacy Bersani, Program Manager for IEEE-HKN. IEEE is the world's largest technical professional organization dedicated to advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. We thank you all for joining us for our 2021 Pathways to Industry program. Before we begin, please note a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are engagement tools for you to use. All tools are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to make the most out of your space. Note that we recommend using a wired internet connection to access today's presentation and closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background that could cause issues. There is no dial-in number for this event. Please make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so that you can hear our presenters. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues by clicking the orange question mark or help icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for today's presenters, you can submit them through the Q&A widget on your screen or click the purple Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. We will answer as many questions as time allows. If you click the green resources icon at the bottom of your screen, you'll find more information about upcoming events, including the interactive networking sessions being held this week and resources provided by IEEE USA. Finally, the on-demand link for today's event will be emailed to all registrants. Our virtual event today is Your Pathway to Industry, a learning guide to your dream career. This session is sponsored by IEEE USA. If you would like to post on Facebook about this event, please use the hashtag IAMHKN. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to IEEE-HKN Director, Nancy Ostin.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Stacy, and thanks to everyone for joining us for day 2 of our Pathways to Industry program. It's our third session of the day, so we're having a great day, lots of great information. I really do want to thank our sponsor, IEEE USA, for sponsoring this event, helping us bring this to you because we think it's very important that we have an opportunity to share professional and career insights with HKN members and students and those that are looking to either are in the young professionals or students that are entering their careers. So today we have 2 great speakers with us. Christopher Sanderson, who's on the IEEE-HKN Board of Governors. He's the Region 5-6 Director for us. He's got a tremendous career he'll tell you about. He's got background experience as a leadership effectiveness coach and in the military and in industry. He chairs the IEEE USA Career and Professional Development Committee. And Amber Orr, who's a professional engineer and engineering manager at Mason County Public Utilities, as an electrical forensics engineer, which I thought was really an interesting title. She's a very active IEEE volunteer and on the Professional Activities Committee for IEEE USA. So I think we're going to start with Amber this time. So Amber, if you want to go ahead and advance your slides, and thanks so much. You can tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Well, you gave me a great introduction, and I think what I'm going to do is start out by essentially introducing myself or the beginning of my career, but at the same time talking about how that blends into how you might think about your career planning as you move forward. Maybe I guess it doesn't really matter where you are in your career planning, but as I understand it, most of our audience is most likely at the beginning stages of your career, so I'm going to assume that's who I'm talking to. But as you're exploring your path, it's really a good idea to think of your beginning of your career as a career incubator, and you're moving through that time, and you really need to think about really what you want out of your career. Everybody has different goals. They have different needs as they move through their career, and maybe a lot of my story may even look a little bit like a cautionary tale, because I'm not really sure that I had the foresight in many cases to be thinking about that. I did okay, but I'm not sure that I always had that guidance and that foresight, and that might be that might be obvious as you look at my path. I did okay, but I'm not sure that I always had that guidance as I moved through. As we look through or look at our industry right now, there are so many opportunities for engineers. There's so many choices, and it probably looks a little bit daunting as you look at the number of organizations and companies out there that are looking for engineers. And that's a good problem to have. We have really a lack of engineers out there. And I can speak from personal experience right now that I know with my organization, we're looking for engineers. We're looking for engineers with experience, and that's particularly difficult. So it's a really interesting time to be in the industry right now. There's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of things happening in this industry. And so it's a good time to really sit and think about what it is that you really want and what's important to you as an engineer entering the field. And so this is probably a good time to really think about what different options are available to you. And I'll talk a little bit about how I entered the industry at this point. And I have some slides that are going to follow now that have a lot of words on them, and I'm not going to read them to you because you can read for yourself. And I actually am not a big fan of PowerPoint, but this is the world we live in right now. I actually just like to talk to people and just have something in the background. But you'll see some pros and cons in each of these slides that relate to the type of company profile that I'll be talking about. And I worked in each of these. The first industry that I entered into was actually a small company. And the small companies versus large companies is kind of subjective in nature. The definition varies based on who is defining it. Can vary based on the financial profile versus the number of employees. So a little bit subjective, but most people would have considered this particular company I was working for as a small company at the time. It was growing rapidly, but it was a small company. And it was an EPC, or engineering, procurement, and construction company. And I entered this job at the time that it was in this tremendous growth period. And I still actually hadn't even fully decided whether I wanted to be an engineer or not. I was kind of vacillating between whether I wanted to be an engineer or if I wanted to, I should say electrical engineer. I was still vacillating between electrical engineering, chemical engineering. And so this really is kind of an intern position of sorts. But I was in the engineering department, and it was really a good learning experience for me in a lot of ways. I learned a lot of really good things about field work back in those days. There was safety was really more of a suggestion than a rule. I was working out in the field a lot, did a lot of field work. I learned learned how to read drawings at that time. I did a lot of, I built panels out in the field. I measured motors, if anybody knows what that is. It's actually testing the insulation resistance or value of motor windings. I actually, like I said, safety was kind of a different thing back in those days. I actually was involved in what we called high potting. The conductors then, that is not something that they would have a newer individual like me doing now. But that high potting is high potential or high voltage testing, dielectric withstand testing of conductors. And what that does is it makes sure no current will flow from one point to another. It's the opposite of a continuity test. It tests a product's insulation quality. So it might look for nicked or crushed insulation, for instance, or terminal spacing errors, like for manufacturing errors, or to make sure that a conductor can handle transients or over voltages. So this was a really good experience for me, really, for just entering into my career. It was a good experience for me. I actually, there were some other real challenges, though, where this was all, I learned things like reverse logic. This is something that not many people are exposed to. But there were also some other really challenging things. I learned a lot about sexual harassment. I learned about things like being in very isolated areas. I learned a lot about very explosive personalities. In those days, in these kind of old school situations, it was not unusual for these very explosive personalities still to jump up on a conference room table and yell at each other. This was very opposite to my personality type, and so it was a learning experience for me, for sure. So I think that's changed a lot these days, but that was not uncommon then, and was a big adjustment for me. But let's get a little bit back to the dynamic of being a small company and the pros and cons. We'll talk a little bit about the pros. At the time, like I said, this company was going through a lot of change. And one of the things that was really good for me is I moved up quickly in the organizational status. There was a lot of promotions. I was recognized for the work I was doing. And so this was really good. I very quickly moved in status and became what they called a field engineer. I also met one of the greatest mentors I ever had. And this man has remained a very close friend of mine and remained a mentor for me. One of the things that you often find in these small companies is that you end up knowing and often having close relationships with leaders in small companies. And that's a huge benefit of small companies. You can learn from some of the best. I also learned some of the benefits of long-term planning, like in terms of like benefits and those sort of things that I had never thought of before entering into the workforce. So this was also a really good thing about entering into a small company, having that coaching that I had not had before then. Also with this company, because it was growing so quickly, it merged with a large company. And because there were stock options, that ended up being a very good thing. I'm going to move this slide forward just because there are some more pros and cons on small companies that you can read as we move forward. Some of the cons with the small companies, there can be a staggering amount of work associated, not just work, but overtime. And oftentimes that is expected. It is not asked of you, but it is oftentimes expected. And oftentimes this is because there are deadlines to meet, oftentimes associated with liquidated damages if you don't meet certain deadlines. So something to take into consideration if you are working for one, good questions to ask. If this is going to be a problem for you, ask those questions. Travel was extensive for me with this company, very extensive. And I'm not talking about leaving for a week to go to some really, great place for, some just short stint. My jobs were all like 6 to 8 months, and a lot of times they were not in attractive places. So, another thing to take into consideration, depending on who you're working for, it got really old. The other thing is a lot of times you don't have much control over the work that they are acquiring, and it may conflict with your personal biases or even maybe personal ethics. And so you may get assigned to work that you are not real crazy about supporting. So another thing to think about. There's also, in many of these cases, these small companies, there's a real roller coaster of the style of the market-based work. So it can be real busy for a period of time, and then it can get real slow. And those highs and lows often will affect the company in very negative ways. So this volatility often, if the company is not, if they're not prepared for that, could be death to that company. So that's another thing to keep in mind. It just really depends on the planning of the organizational leaders. So just things to think about with a small company. Oftentimes there's enough planning that it's not a big deal. From this point, I did tire of the traveling, the type of traveling it was. I actually do like to travel, but that type of travel did wear on me after a period of time. I ended up going to work, well, especially after it moved into this large company profile, because it did merge with a very large industrial EPC firm, and the work environment changed a lot. I've got the pros and cons listed next to the large company. There are some really big pros and cons there. I was not as crazy about the very large company profile. It works really well for some people. It was not, wasn't my favorite environment. I ended up moving into another engineering firm, a consulting firm. And this consulting firm had, at first, I worked just in their general division, and then they opened an international division. And it was interesting. They opened this international division in an area where I had previously worked for this EPC firm. And it was a beautiful area. It was one of the places that I went that I did really like when I was traveling. And I thought, one of these days I'm going to move there. And this international division opened an office there. And I was one of the first people that volunteered to move to this particular area. And I loved it. And we worked on these really interesting power plant projects where they were a fluidized bed technology, and it's this fluidized bed. The particular technology was to do waste to energy type of projects. We had projects all over the world. The first ones we did were in the Czech Republic, not far from Prague, in a place called Most Czech Republic, and we had projects like in Bermuda, and so the travel was much more attractive, and I was really enjoying that. And then after I was really getting settled in there, we were required, of all things, by a company. It was Cincinnati Gas and Electric, and so all of a sudden I worked for a utility of sorts, which was really unusual. And then that utility merged with a company called Synergy. And Synergy was based out of Ohio. And here I was living all the way on the West Coast. And Synergy said, hey, you guys can all keep your jobs, but you have to move to Ohio. And there wasn't very many of us that were in a position where we really wanted to move to Ohio. And so I don't think anybody did. So that work all moved to a sister company of theirs in Ohio. Interesting, Synergy is now part of Duke Energy. So if I had stayed with them, I would be part of Duke now. That is how I ended up getting out of that particular very interesting work that I loved, was just merely because of the change of environment. And then I ended up working for a large OEM. And so I went from the small company profile that went into a large company profile, back into a small company profile, and now here I'm working for a large OEM. And a large OEM is an original equipment manufacturer. So here I am working for a large company again. And it was, once again, some of the things that I wasn't crazy about. You kind of get lost in the numbers a lot of times. Fortunately, I did already, I had been, I knew some of the people there, so I didn't feel quite so lost in the numbers. But, and there is some travel, it wasn't as bad as maybe just starting out there because I was already familiar with people there. The benefits are good. It was a very interesting place, though, there. One of the things that they did is we designed large equipment for material transport systems, canal digging equipment. Like if you've seen the big canals that run through California, it's the same sort of thing. It's just large equipment that puts those in. We did them all through Egypt and all sorts of places. We also worked and we did classified pilot projects for nuclear facilities, for waste handling, that sort of thing, cleanup efforts in nuclear facilities. So a lot of very interesting things. It was also quirky. The original owner that had started the business, his fortune was made shortly after World War II, and he was very worried about people stealing designs. So he built the whole building that we were in without windows because he was worried that people were going to look in the windows and see our proprietary designs and steal them. And so finally, because of fire code, he was forced to put in at least 2 windows. And so one of the windows ended up going in the room where they reproduced the drawings, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term blueprint, but back in the day, they were actually blue instead of just being black and white photocopies. There was an ammonia process. So the paper was originally yellow. And when you laid the mylar or vellum, it almost looks like onion paper over the top of it, and you run it through the machine that reproduces it, there's an ammonia process that turns the paper blue. And it's stinky. It smells like really strong, like ammonia. And he refused to actually make the windows open because he was worried about people getting in and out of the building and stealing our proprietary designs. And so a lot of times you'd go in there and that blueprint machine would be running and it would smell so strong of ammonia that people would pass out. And it was crazy stuff back then. Anyways, those are some of my stories of working at that place. Once again, it was another place where there was a lot of overtime just expected. It wasn't really an option. Nobody asked. It was just expected. And by the end of my time there, as much as I really enjoyed the design work and I learned a lot of things there, I decided, even with the benefits and some of the things I really liked about it, like the travel. I mean, we worked on a lot of really interesting projects in South America and really all over the world. I was kind of done with the heavy expectations, and I decided to just be self-employed for a while, just work for myself. I knew quite a few people, and I knew I could keep myself busy, and so I decided to be self-employed. So that's almost being like a really, really small business. Except you don't have any benefits. You got to make sure and cover those benefits for yourself. So if you ever decide to do that, make sure you really think about that too, because now all of a sudden you need to be thinking about covering your own insurance. If you need to think about liability, those sort of things, which eventually I moved into this forensic work because of people I knew and they needed help with this forensic work. You really do need to think about liability. And so definitely worth thinking about. And I'll talk about the forensic stuff in a minute. But when you think about the benefit side, really think about getting yourself covered from a liability standpoint. And all of a sudden, all your benefits go away. And I hadn't really thought about that gap in a period of time if you're not really contributing to something like a 401k or, some other sort of defined benefit plan, then that does have an impact later on. And so if you haven't started to think about those things yet, it's worth thinking about. But as I moved into this self-employment status, remember I talked all the way back when I was working for the consulting engineer, and we were working on these fluidized beds with the power plants. Well, they came back. There was another company that picked up a lot of this work with these fluidized beds and doing these waste to energy products, and they picked up the phone and they called me. And so I started working on those again. And we were working on these all over the world, in Italy, and I mean, it's just all over the place, and in the UK, and throughout the UK, I should say. And so they came back. We were doing, there's a heavy instrumentation on those. So heavy instrumentation, a lot of programmable logic control design. There's a interdisciplinary team to work with. So very interesting work. In the midst of all of this, or when, I should say not in the midst, when it started to slow down, because once again, this is very roller coaster work too, very market driven. All of a sudden, this is when the utility work came knocking on my door. And that's the first time I went to work for a cooperative. And so this is where we can kind of start to talk about public sector. The cooperative work isn't directly defined as public sector, but it is essentially the same thing. It's the same business model. Cooperatives are owned by their membership. And so they are governed by their membership. And so you can essentially say that they are public sector work, even though they're not a public utility. They're essentially the same thing, very similar business model versus an investor-owned utility, which is very much different. They're obviously owned by their investors. They're governed by the Public Utility Council, and generally speaking. So they have different business models. A cooperative and a public utility cannot have margins. They cannot make a profit. So you have very different business models than an investor-owned utility. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just telling you that the business models are different. So obviously, when you look at these slides, the public sector work is covering much more than just utilities. I'm just speaking from my experience as a utility worker. But as I went to work for the cooperative work, all of a sudden now I'm back into doing protection work. Remember that first job I talked about where I was measuring motors and doing some high pot testing. Now I'm getting back to those roots, so to speak. And first I'm functioning as a systems engineer, and then I work into becoming a protection engineer, and I'm loving it. I really like that. I'm doing artifact studies, I'm doing protection work, doing some relay work, and it is really where my love is. And I really set my roots down in utility work, and I've been in utility work ever since. I'm doing things like developing capital budgets, doing system planning. I assist in SCADA and grid modernization projects. I have worked for a couple of different utilities now, doing things like generation and distribution and transmission planning now. So all utilities can vary. A lot of times they just will specialize in one thing, either distribution, transmission, or generation. I have worked for one that had all three inside their purview. So I've learned a lot working for these utilities, and so they are very varied now. And the one thing I want to say about utility work is a lot of times people think that because there are other facets of engineering that sound so much more intriguing with some of our modern movements, that power is kind of stuck in the past. But we have a lot we have a lot of movement in the power industry right now because we have an aging or old infrastructure that needs a lot of work. And so with our grid modernization and the recognition that we have these monodirectional passive systems and that they need to move into this bidirectional non-passive system as we're bringing on these demand energy resources, we need to have more expertise in our sector. And we also recognize the need for more cybersecurity expertise. And so we are really relying on our new generation of expertise to come on and help us out. And the public sector has some very, a lot of stability. There are some very good benefits. You'll find that most people that enter the public sector don't leave. It's a rarity. They get they get their roots put in, and rarely do they leave. I'm not saying there's not cons. You'll see them on these slides as you read through them. There are some things that are difficult in the public sector, like affecting change can be difficult. I always like to equate it to a large ship. Nothing turns on a dime. It's very slow moving, and it can be very frustrating to people that like to move fast, and they like to have something effected really fast. That doesn't happen in the public sector in general often, but we're starting to see some of that shift just a little bit. The other thing that we used to never see in utilities, for instance, is remote work. That used to be such a taboo subject in utilities, but that is now changing because of COVID. It's forced utilities, for instance, to look at that. And so finally, we are seeing some change. And even though there was the idea that all change was super slow with utilities, COVID made us change fast. So we know we can. So it's something that utilities are seeing, that we can be more flexible than we thought we could. I think I'm starting to run into Christopher's time a little bit. So I'll end with this slide and just say that, end with these definitions. I won't read these to you either, but just say that I welcome questions. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of a glimpse of what some of the pros and cons of each of these business models look like. I know it's a super quick overview, and I'd be happy to look at these in more depth with you if you feel like sending me an email or anything like that. Thank you.
So, Christopher, you want to just jump right in over to your part of the presentation?
Yes, ma'am, I really appreciate it. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to my particular part of the presentation and take a journey through the Wizard of Oz. So I may be dating myself, but I want you to go along this journey with me, because I think it'll make a little bit more better sense as we travel to the Wizard of Oz. So with that being said, let's play a little bit of a presentation game. As you can see, there are multiple IEEE USA bricks. And so the goal of the presentation is to identify how many different IEEE USA golden bricks that you can find in this presentation deck. And for the first 3 people who come up with the right number, IEEE USA will be giving out a special little prize there. So, developing your pathway to industry, a learning guide to your dream career. Now, I have to admit that I am not the originator of this original presentation deck, or I should say the ebook. It was actually developed by Mr. John Collins, and it's been adjusted for this 2021 IEEE Eta Kappa Nu Pathway to Industry Conference, sponsored by IEEE USA and facilitated by myself as well as Ms. Amber Orr. So, no additional rights or privileges shall be taken from this presentation, Developing Your Pathway to Industry, a learning guide to your dream career, without the permission of the author, which is me. This presentation is a self-reflection upon the industry path journeys of both myself as well as Ms. Amber Orr, who just got through presenting earlier. So, for those of you who do not remember the story of the Wizard of Oz, let me give you a little bit of a brief understanding. The story is of a tale of a young Kansas City farm girl who wishes to escape her troubles in her life and finds herself in a Technicolor world where some of the parts aren't so very nice. Most of it is beautiful, but much like life, she finds some friends, and along the way, a scarecrow who wants to find a brain, which will be scholarship, a tin man who is in search of an heart, which will be character, and a lion who's in search of courage, which is going to be our attitude. They journey together down the yellow brick road and as they look for the Wizard of Oz, who has the answer to all their questions. So, you decided to become an engineer. Maybe you had an inspiring family member or a mentor who guided you into engineering, or maybe you just loved talking about taking things apart as a child. And for someone who said you should be an engineer, whatever brought you here, now is the beginning of your journey. No matter if you're a high school or decades of experience, like myself, this presentation will help you from finding the different skills that you need to land your dream job. Engineering school was tough. Actually, it's been a pretty tough year for all of us. But undoubtedly, yes, it's worth the journey. So with that being said, let's continue to travel down the road here. Now, one of the most important things I think that you should really understand is that how do you differentiate yourself from your peers in these troubling times right now? Some ways may be in your career, you played sports. Some of you might have been in ROTC or JROTC, or student government, internships, co-ops, part-time work, focused on doing publications, maybe join different honor societies. Now, as a young professional within college, you have the opportunity to do a lot of those different things within the IEEE umbrella. And I've been fortunate. I didn't play any college sports, but I played some junior college sports. But I was in the military, and I was in ROTC. So those were some of the things that I used to differentiate myself from a lot of my peers. I also worked part-time. So Forbes magazine, back actually last year, April of last year, did a really good article which I thought was very, very interesting. And it's 1 year later. And they identified the 8 skills that a person will need post a coronavirus world. Number 1, adaptability and flexibility, tech savviness, creativity and innovation, critical thinking skills, digital coding skills, leadership, emotional intelligence, and a commitment to lifelong learning. And I can definitely speak to all 8 of those have really allowed me to better prepare myself for where I am today. And I think it's be very interesting for a lot of us here. So there are advantages and disadvantages, and Amber actually went into a little bit more detail personally about working for the public sector. She talked about job security and stability, which you definitely have in a public sector job. She also talked about the opportunities to work overseas and in different cities and around the world. But she also talked about many other things, such as being able to attend different conferences. And a lot of times, those organizations are encourage you to learn what's going on outside of their current environment of where you are. And they also normally have some pretty good health care, which may be something very important for you to explore and think about as you make your choices. She also talked a little bit about telework. And yes, that has definitely changed for a lot of us. And at least for me, I've always teleworked, so it is no different for me being in a current environment that I'm in. But now let's talk about some of the cons of, or disadvantages, if you will, about working for the public sector. Some workplaces might be bloated, and so there's lots of bureaucracy that takes place. You could also look at it can take a while to get things done and accomplished, and that may or may not be something that you're really looking for. Your workplace won't offer some of the unique private sector perks. You know, if you was out there in Silicon Valley, you know, being able to have a cafeteria to go grab anything to eat, having games to play, you're not going to get those type of things in a public sector job. But many of them require some really good background clearances. So if you have a troubled or challenging background, the public sector may not be the thing for you. Also, there is a lack of benefits that's normally available in the public sector in reference to maternity leave or parental leave. And the job applicant process can take months versus days and weeks compared to other sectors of the economy there. So I'm not going to go through this whole list of disadvantages. I want to talk some more about some of the other sectors here. And so with that being said, let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of a large company. Generally, you're going to definitely have a lot of higher pay and less of a glass ceiling, if you will. So you can really maximize your offering in reference to your pay compared to the public sector. You definitely will receive some nice bonuses compared to maybe the public sector. It's based on performance and profit sharing. There are lots of other different benefits as well. So you can normally have budgets for attending conferences as well as continuing your education and training opportunities. There are some disadvantages as well. You know, adjusting to a new culture is different for any company, but it can be a lot more challenging in a very large company. And your personality may or may not fit in with that company's culture. The flexibility in reference to hours may require you to work outside the normal 9 to 5. And I think that's definitely true for me, it being in a COVID-19 environment where a lot of us are working from home. I find myself working more hours while I'm at home versus coming to work. And also depending upon the different organizations, you can have lots of processes, and it can be slow to adapt to changes in some large organizations. And I definitely have been experiencing that here recently with a recent change. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages of a public sector job, large. Now let's look at a small. From a small company standpoint, you are definitely going to be able to have lots of opportunity to work and grow in a very small organization. And the ability to influence the company's direction or cultural processes are definitely there for you as well. You may also receive paid maternity leave and have benefits and things of that sort. So those definitely are some things there, but I'm going to move forward, and I want to talk about a couple of things that I think are very, very good and important here. So let's talk about your resume, which is very important. Your resume is a story of how you grow, how you've grown over your career. It describes on a piece of paper to someone that you haven't met yet how you can be able to contribute to the company's success. The unfortunate part of it is it's about the HR manager or the hiring manager is probably going to take about 20 to 30 seconds to review your resume. And so you have to make sure that you have the most pertinent information in your resume. And now I get this question a lot from some of my mentees that I work with. They think they should just have one resume. I have 20 different versions of my resume, depending upon what type of job it is and what type of function it is within that job. And so that's something that you would definitely look at doing yourself. Now, the great thing is that IEEE USA has actually had a lot of really good seminars on resume building. And so we just recently just had one as of earlier this week, Career Transitioning 101, as well as some of the other ones in the past. And so I highly recommend for you to take the opportunity and take the advantage of really going back and listening to some of those webinars. Now, a resume should be no longer than 1 page for college hires, unless you have some experience. 2 pages for people like myself that have about 15 years of experience. Now, they say that if you have 20 years plus, it should be no more than 3 pages. I would say that probably does not hold true today. So if you are coming from academia or have significant research skills and experience, you may want to be able to add that to your resume, but be mindful. The number one thing is that you have to get past one of the toughest things for any job is its applicant tracking system. So that can be very daunting sometimes in trying to get past that to be able to have your resume reviewed. A lot of times that's actually being sent in a PDF form into the system or into a Word document system. So whenever you are sending your resume forward, you have to also be mindful of the type of format that you're using. And so I'm going to talk to you for just a moment about a couple of things I think is very pertinent to you as you go through this job search. Your email address. Your email address should be professional. It should be your first, middle, and last name, because there can be a lot of John Smiths out there. You want to make sure that you're using recognizable domains such as gmail.com, outlook.com, yahoo.com, or even better, IEEE.com or IEEE.org, as well as ASME.org. Those are very good professional email addresses. Sometimes it amazes me that I look at resumes and their email addresses, and it makes me wonder about how I see the email address versus the applicant's name. So you want to make sure that your resume and your email address really reflects who you are as an individual. Now, the importance of LinkedIn. And this is something I had a discussion with yesterday's actually networking session. We talked a little bit about this. I think that the best way to look at LinkedIn is your brand of who you are. And 87% of recruiters use LinkedIn to review a candidate's capabilities in their search. So you want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is a reflection upon who you are. And so you want to make sure to have a very nice professional looking profile picture up there. You want to make sure that you, within LinkedIn, fill out all the different parts that they're asking for you to fill out within LinkedIn. Now, you're going to have opportunity to see my profile as well as Amber's. And so I would encourage you to definitely look at some of the things that we highlight in our LinkedIn profiles. In this case, if any of you want to link in with either myself or Amber, you can see our LinkedIn profile addresses there. So I'm a big believer. For me, my LinkedIn profile has a little bit of a different graphic in the background. You can also continue to use the standard background that LinkedIn provides for you. But it's important, again, you put your best foot forward, if you will, or your best profile forward when you're looking at LinkedIn. So, some life lessons from the Wizard of Oz that every college student should adhere to. Number one, there's no place like home. At the beginning of the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy would have to have done anything to get back home. Her monochrome world in Kansas City, but after she learned that what truly lies had badly, she learned where her heart truly lies and how badly she wants to get back home. All college students use their 4 years in school to find themselves and to determine where they will be most happy at. So while we all have grand plans of the future, sometimes those plans change. So allow yourself the opportunity to find and manage your relationships while you're in college. I think that's very, very important. Another life lesson to be mindful of from the Wizard of Oz that we can all use. Don't be just a nothing. Your head is full of stuff. So when we're talking about that, it's important to understand that you have a lot of information that you've taken you over the past 4 years to accumulate from a college standpoint. So take the time to understand and share your experiences. Meaning, maybe you was part of a big project that developed a new process for developing a chemical, or you was on the dean's list. Things like that were very instrumental while you was in college should be shared in your LinkedIn profile, as well as mentioned in your resume as well. So number 3, people without brains do an awful lot of talking. So that can be very important to trust and understand, is that if you don't think about what you're really trying to look for, you could spend a lot of time trying to figure out where you want to, what you're really trying to do. And so sometimes that can be a little discouraging in reference to finding a job. Lesson number 4, good should always triumph over evil. And so one of the things I think is very important for you to really remember and think about here is that remember the good things that you did for others while you was in college, as well as what you're doing today. In reference to your network, people will remember those good things. Now, if you did a lot of bad things in college, they'll probably remember those too, and may not be a good resource for you to rely upon for future opportunities. So number 5, find somewhere over the rainbow. Do not just look at currently where you are, but look at where you want to be. Understand that how you need to grow both personally as well as professionally is very, very important. So have an end goal or a end vision of where you see yourself and work towards trying to get there. So with that being said, that's the end of my presentation, but I want to leave you with a little bit of information, a little bit of a video here, and hopefully it's going to work for us here.
What are the two most powerful words in the English language? The two most powerful words in the English language are I am. Because what comes after I am will shape your life. What you speak after I am, what you believe after I am, will control your decisions and shape your life.
I am powerful. Whatever I want to achieve, I believe that I am capable. It's all attainable. And what you speak after the words I am will shape you. Those words will really make or break you. So be careful what you're saying every day. You don't let the negativity come in and take you. Stay strong and positive and you will make a breakthrough. The two words I am are so powerful. So if you say that you're stuck and you're stressed, then you are. But if you aim for the stars and you shoot, you go far. It all comes from within. Just think about it. If you believe that you're great, you will attempt great things. When you affirm I am strong, you know the power that brings. The words will shape you in a powerful way. Make sure every day look in the mirror and say, I am. I am. I am powerful. I am a beast. I am a warrior. I am unique. I am. I am. I am powerful. It's not just a phrase that you say. You've got to feel it, believe it. You've got to scream it and be it. Repeat it every day. Don't let your power go to waste. Use this information and write your affirmations. Turn into incantations. Unlock your hidden power. Affirm I am amazing. This is your recreation. No more procrastination. Now there you're empowered. You're no longer unconscious. Let the words I am seep into your subconscious. You've got so many options. I am anything and everything I wanted. The two words I am are so powerful. So if you say you're depressed and you're tired, then you are. But if you say I'm great and believe, you go far. It all comes from within. Just think about it. If you believe that you're great, you will attempt great things. When you affirm I'm strong, you know the power that brings. The words will shape you in a powerful way. Make sure every day look in the mirror and say, I am. I am. You gotta speak it into existence. You gotta be persistent. Shake up the system. No longer I can. From now it's I can. No longer I want. From now it's I am. You can overcome anything. You can achieve and overachieve all of your dreams. If you believe and see it in your mind, you're gonna get there in the physical. So just remember these principles. Say it every day. I am. I am capable of anything. I am powerful. I am strong. I am everything I wanna be. I am rich. I am successful. I am wise. I am more than enough. I am a winner. I am a champion. I'm an achiever. Believer in myself. I am disciplined. I am health. I am whole. I am wealth. I am.
I am. Thoughts are powerful. Thoughts lead to action. Actions over time become habits. And habits lead to long, lasting results.
So with that being said, I want to thank y'all for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you. And Stacey, if we have any...
No, Christopher, I want to thank you so much. And we're getting close to the end, but I really thought your video was great because it made me think of our hashtag IEEE-HKN. So it's powerful, right? Scholarship, attitude, character. It's really powerful. So the great news is that we want to take some questions, but we can do that over in our spatial chat space. So in the resource tabs, you mentioned this earlier, there's a tab to go to. It's called Spatial Chat. It's a really cool little platform where we can go and talk to each other. And you can. Christopher was going to come over and talk to you, and there's be some other experts in there. We've got John McDonald, who's going to be over there talking about key decisions in your career. We've got Abram Eham, who's from ABB, talking about goals, and Carolyn Adams talking about resilience. I'm going to be over there. Some other HKN people are going to be over there. So please join us right now over on the Spatial Chat platform. Take you just a second to set it up. You don't need to register. You just need to click on it and go over there. We've got more pathways for you tomorrow. There's 3 more sessions and 2 more networking opportunities tomorrow. If you didn't upload your resume, our sponsors and companies are looking for that, so you can go back to the registration link you originally did and upload your resume. And Christopher, thank you for a great presentation and taking us down the yellow brick road to a dream job and a career that we all love. I love the analogy and appreciate it. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the rest of Pathways and right now over on Spatial Chat. Thank you.